TechDrover back again. Tools stack and best practices abound, but tech still sucks. Let's fix that. Talking to the lens is much harder than talking to people. I thought this would be easy, but it's much easier presenting to people. I'm out here, lovely Colorado wilderness, doing testing for an app I'm working on. So again, you got to test things in the real world. And I got my notes. Building software, they always bring in the team metaphor, whether it's tech or anything else. And I've said it before. If you're going to have a team metaphor, let's break it down a little bit. I'm from Texas, so I always go football. So when you look at football, you got your offense. In business, that's your development, your project owners, people who define the product, build it, create the product. Then you got your defense. They cover up when the offense has a problem. They make sure everything's going to work. So that's going to be your QA, your support, your documentation, especially if your product is very complicated or your user interface isn't that intuitive. Lastly, you got special teams, the unsung heroes. It's going to be your research. That's going to be your operations staff. And your research is looking at problems far out in the future. Your operations staff, they keep things running on a day-to-day basis. And you don't even think about them until something goes wrong. But they're always there, making sure things work. It's kind of hard today finding a place that wasn't directly in the wind. Everybody talks about architects. They're kind of like cross between engineers and operations. They look at the bigger picture, how things fit together, how things are going to get deployed. What's the security model? How's it going to be protected? How's it going to be delivered for scalability and that kind of thing? All these functions are needed. You can't deliver a successful product without them. They all have their own special focus in getting that done. And when you look at development, we always talk about software developer, software engineer. We use those terms interchangeably. I don't think they are. There's trainings that, come out and say it. You've been a security guard all your life. We're going to train you to be a software developer. Well, they're going to train you on the syntax. That doesn't mean you know how to break down the problem and deliver it. You can learn that, but that training doesn't necessarily deliver it. And thinking about software developer, software engineer, reminds me of that interconnected plastic block movie, from a few years ago. You had the master builders who did the design, the big picture stuff, and you had people on the ground implementing that, building it. Again, you had to have both of them to build their city. But they're doing different things. When you think of tech, delivering software, engineers, they're focused on solving the business problem and how to break it down. And that's not something you can always schedule because they're working on the hard problems. They know when to follow the rules, they know the rules and the best practices, but they also know when to break them because you got to break them to do something important. Many of them, myself included, learn tools on the fly. We're starting a project, we're going to use this technology. Some people panic, I say, okay, we'll figure it out. Engineers also know what's going on under the hoods. They know why things work. When you think about mobile especially, it's really an embedded system. So you got to understand what's going on in the hood, how the operating system works, if it's going to allow things to run in the background, if it's going to allow you to do data collection in the background. The other side of that, developers, they're really the production side. They build the product, and no insult is intended because they're critical. It's kind of like a manufacturing line. You got the engineers building, designing it. You got the people in the factory doing the production. So they're going to follow the established rules, the best practices. They're going to implement design patterns. Engineers may write design patterns. Developers are going to implement them. And they're crucial for building, maintaining, and extending the production product. You got to have somebody down there building it for production. They focus on process, syntax, and coding standards. I was once in an organization. One group wanted coding standards that were 28 pages long. That was ridiculous. Another group said, we're going to do this. It's 4 pages. Kind of ended the discussion in the meetings, but it made sense. Don't get carried away with coding standards. Developers can grow into engineers, learn more, learn what's going on under the hood. Expand your horizons. Think sometimes, why are we doing it this way? Why is this considered a best practice? if it doesn't really fit your product or project. AI, among other things, shaking things up. Developers have already started being replaced. Offshoring, lower cost development, even though it may look lower cost to the bean counters on an hourly basis, but if it's half the price and takes 3-4 times as long, it's not saving any money. And you've got an over-reliance on off-the-shelf libraries, open source, following the best practices. You got to think, is that really a long-term career path? Someone else's design patterns, following the rules sounds like a lot like generative AI. They're trained on stuff. They follow the rules. That's all they know. It's not going to expand beyond it. So if you're a developer, look for ways to grow into being an engineer. Again, learn what's going on under the hoods. Look for different ways to do things. Question what's going on. Why are we doing it this way when we have all these problems? Otherwise, you may have to learn other phrases, move into other careers. Worst case, learn things like, do you want fries with that? So, recommendation. When you're hiring, hire the right type of people. Hire some engineers to do the heavy lifting. Hire the developers to build out the product, polish it, and get it out the door. Use engineers for innovation, the core IP, and any complex technical solutions. I've seen teams try to implement geofences without really understanding them. Developers were happy to go along with that. Engineer comes along and says, here are the limitations of geofences. So really dig into it, learn what's really going on. Develop a transition plan. How are you going to take that core IP, that work from the engineers, the innovation, and how are you going to move it into production? You can't just throw it into sprints. That doesn't work. I've seen teams waste a lot of time and money on that. So figure out how you're going to move it in from the engineering team into development to get a successful product out the door. Again, you got to have both. All right, that's it for this topic. Next up, finding talent. Till next time, thanks for watching. If you have suggestions for topics, need some help, hit me up. That's a wrap. Build smart, build real, build what matters.